Mirror Talk episode 24, The Spell of Should, Obligation Language and Replacing Coercion with Choice. Welcome to Mirror Talk, language of the nervous system. There's a small word that sits quietly in the middle of so many sentences, and yet it holds an empire's worth of power. That word is should, a word that sounds harmless, almost helpful, a suggestion from conscience, a nudge toward improvement. But underneath, it hums with something older and colder. Duty. Fear, a subtle kind of control that's been so deeply absorbed, we mistake it for our own voice, breaking the grammar of guilt. Most of us have built our lives inside the spell of should. We should be grateful. We should forgive. We should work harder, love better, speak softer, and complain less. Each phrase wears a halo of virtue, but when you trace it through the body, you'll find tension sitting just behind the tongue, breath held hostage beneath the ribs. The word should doesn't ask, it orders. It doesn't invite, it instructs. And yet we rarely notice the difference, because this command doesn't come from outside authority anymore. It's become internalized as self-discipline, as a moral compass, as the ghost of approval we're still chasing. That's the hidden grammar of guilt. In this episode, we're not trying to banish should. We're trying to understand how it became a linguistic leash, a word that turns care into coercion and responsibility into repression. We're learning to hear its tone, not as morality, but as memory. Because behind every should is a history, a parent's disappointment, a teacher's correction, a religion's rulebook, a culture's demand for perfection. This is the language of obligation, and like all inherited spells, it began as protection. But what once kept you safe now keeps you small. The inheritance of obedience. Before we ever spoke consciously, we listened. Our nervous systems learned language through tone, not through meaning. We absorbed not only what was said, but how it was said, the cadence of authority, the rise and fall of expectation, the breathless pause before reprimand. The human body learns hierarchy before it learns grammar. When a caregiver's love felt conditional, our physiology recorded it as law. I must behave correctly to stay connected. That's where should took root, not as a word, but as a survival reflex. In polyvagal terms, should activates the same circuitry that governs fawn and freeze, the twin responses of compliance. We tighten our jaw to swallow in protest. We shallow our breath to avoid disruption. We modulate tone to sound agreeable. Our language evolves around safety, not self-expression. And yet, decades later, that same pattern lives on, not in the voice of an authority figure, but in the murmur of self-correction. I should have done more. I shouldn't feel this way. I should be grateful. Others have it worse. Each should carries with it an invisible or else. Or else they'll be disappointed. Or else you'll lose your belonging in society. Or else you won't be enough. That's not morality. That's muscle memory. The physiology of a word. Take a moment to notice what happens when you say the word should aloud. Feel the body's response, not just the meaning, but the micro-tension it creates. For most people, the diaphragm contracts. The throat narrows slightly, the breath holds. The nervous system prepares to perform. That's because should sits halfway between intention and obligation, a linguistic middle ground that the body reads as uncertainty and threat. You're not freely choosing, you're negotiating with invisible expectations. When the mind says should, the body hears danger. It's the quiet alarm of anticipated disapproval, a physiological rehearsal for rejection. And so, even in small moments, I should call them back. I should be happier. I should eat better. We unknowingly rehearse microdoses of submission. This is how language becomes neurology. The spell itself in Mirror Talk, we use the word spell deliberately, not as a metaphor, but as precision. Every word we speak is a frequency, a pattern of vibration shaped by history, emotion, and intent. And should is one of the oldest spells of human civilization, woven through religion, philosophy, and governance. It was built to create order, to keep groups cohesive and predictable. But over time, what began as guidance became guilt. Thou shalt not turned into, you should know better. Even modern psychology often disguises shoulds in therapeutic clothing. I should practice more self-care. I should set boundaries. I should heal faster. The self-help industry doesn't remove the leash, it polishes it. And so the spell persists, camouflaged as improvement, disguised as discipline, echoed in every slogan that tells us how to earn our worth. But the nervous system has no concept of virtue. It only knows safety and threat. And any sentence that begins with should signals danger to its deepest layers. It tightens, contracts, prepares for punishment, even when none is coming. That's the essence of obligatory and language of obligation. Words that sound noble but feel suffocating. The illusion of the good self. The irony of should is that it's always spoken by the part of us that wants to be good. It's the voice of the conscientious child, the dutiful student, the reliable partner, the part that learned love was earned through obedience. But goodness built on suppression is not virtue, it's vigilance. And when the body is constantly negotiating between authenticity and approval, empathy becomes exhaustion. This is why many of us reach burnout not from cruelty, but from compliance. We say yes while meaning no. We stay quiet to keep the peace. We equate kindness with self-erasure. In doing so, we uphold a moral system that was never designed for mutual thriving. It was designed for control. Should is how culture maintains conformity. Choice is how the individual restores integrity. The difference between them is not semantics, it's sovereignty. Linguistic alchemy. So how do we begin to break the spell? not by censorship, but by translation. We listen differently. We start to hear the energetic signature of each word, the contraction or expansion it evokes. Say these two phrases out loud. I should rest. I choose to rest. The first one tightens the chest. The second opens it. That's the nervous system's vote. Linguistic alchemy isn't about replacing bad words with good ones. It's about aligning language with physiology. Every phrase you speak can either constrict or co-regulate your body. That's the real difference between obedience and choice. One contracts breath, the other expands it. So in this episode, we'll begin mapping the body's reaction to obligation language, decoding the grammar of guilt, and rewriting it into a syntax of consent. Because regulation isn't achieved by changing your thoughts, it's achieved by changing your tone, your breath, your pacing, your rhythm of meaning. When you speak at the speed of safety, you reprogram the emotional architecture of your reality. The mirror of morality. The next time you catch yourself saying should, pause. Don't rush to replace it with something else. Instead ask, whose rule am I reciting right now? What version of me was this sentence built to protect? You may discover that most of your shoulds aren't yours at all. They are borrowed lines from the collective script, fragments of a moral theatre that rewards sacrifice and punishes self-trust. The truth is, morality without awareness becomes mimicry. It's not conscience, it's conditioning. And when we mistake compliance for compassion, we end up performing empathy instead of embodying it. To speak consciously is to step out of performance, to reclaim the right to sound like yourself again. A gentle rebellion. This episode isn't about rejecting responsibility, it's about reclaiming agency. The point isn't to never use should again, but to recognize when it's being used on you. To feel, in real time, the difference between pressure and purpose. When your words begin aligning with your nervous system, when I should becomes I choose, you'll notice something subtle. Your body exhales. Your tone softens, your presence deepens. That's not selfishness, that's self-regulation. And it's from that state that true compassion becomes possible, not as an obligation, but as overflow. So as we begin this exploration, take a breath. Let your shoulders drop. Let the tongue rest gently against the back of your teeth, and feel how much more spacious honesty becomes when it isn't rushed by guilt. This is where language begins to unlearn its servitude, where morality softens into authenticity, where obedience ends and choice begins. Now we move into element 1, the anatomy of obligation language. We'll trace how should evolved through religion, authority, and relational survival, and how the body learned to interpret it as a command, not a choice. Element 1. The anatomy of obligation language. Every language has its ghost words, those syllables that outlive their creators, still whispering their commands through the centuries. Should is one of them. It is not simply a word, it is a cultural fossil, a fragment of social architecture built to ensure compliance long before consent was ever considered. To understand the anatomy of obligation language, we need to trace it through history, psychology, and physiology to see how something as small as a single syllable could hold entire nervous systems hostage. The inheritance of should. The English should descends from the Old English sold, meaning was obliged to, or had to. Its earliest uses were not about morality, but duty, what one owed to a ruler, a deity, or a superior. It came from the same linguistic root as shall, the voice of authority, the echo of command. Even in its most ancient form, should carried the weight of expectation. It wasn't about possibility. It was about payment, an invisible debt owed to order, to family, to God. When we say I should, we unknowingly summon the same syntax once used by subjects to address kings and servants to their masters. Its language encoded with hierarchy. Centuries later, as society softened into civility, the word disguised itself as politeness. You should really try harder. We should all be kinder. The whip became a whisper, but the body, ever ancient, ever literal, still recognizes command when it hears it. That's the first secret of obligation language. It evolves on the surface, but its nervous system effect remains the same. The linguistic cage obligation words, should, must, ought, have to, supposed to, all operate through the same grammatical trick. They remove the speaker's agency while maintaining the illusion of choice. I should go doesn't mean I want to go. It means I don't want to disappoint someone. The syntax itself erases the I, not grammatically, but somatically. It makes your will conditional, subordinates your desire to an invisible law. Linguists refer to this as deontic modality, a category of grammar that expresses necessity or obligation. But what fascinates psychologists is not the structure of the sentence, but the structure of the self it produces. A should-driven self is always at war with itself. It tries to obey and rebel at the same time, tightening its throat to swallow resentment while still forcing the word through. This internal split becomes the emotional signature of modern adulthood, outwardly composed, inwardly compromised. In Mirror-Linguistic Hypothesis terms, should functions as a command disguised as care. It projects conditional belonging into the nervous system, a way of saying, if I obey, I'll be safe. That's why should feels heavier than choose. One implies a contract, the other implies freedom. The polyvagal pattern of submission. Let's bring the nervous system into the room. Every time we say, should, our ventral vagal system, the state of safety, social engagement, and authentic expression, briefly loses dominance. In its place, sympathetic activation rises, Heart rate increases, breath shortens, microtension floods the jaw and neck. The body prepares to comply. This physiological signature mirrors what the Polyvagal theory calls the appease response, a subtle form of fawning. It's not overt fear, but anticipatory appeasement. The system braces to meet expectations, even when no one else is in the room. This is why self-talk rooted in obligation often feels exhausting. The nervous system doesn't know it's a sentence. It thinks it's a signal of subordination. And when you repeat should hundreds of times per day, I should eat better, I should rest, I should stop scrolling, you're not motivating yourself. You're activating microdoses of self-threat. That's the tragic irony. We use should to self-regulate, but it does the opposite. A hidden voice beneath the word. If you listen closely, every should hides a speaker, a voice from your past using your current breath. It might be a parent's tone echoing from childhood. You should be grateful. A teacher's moral correction. You should know better. A culture's expectation. You should look successful, sound confident, stay pleasant. These phrases don't just live in memory, they live in muscle. The body doesn't store stories in sentences, it stores them in states. When we recall these old directives, the same neurochemical patterns reactivate. The jaw sets, the chest tightens, the stomach braces. This is the biology of internalized authority. And that's what keeps the spell alive, the repetition of tone, not thought. So even when we try to rewrite our beliefs, the nervous system keeps obeying the old sound pattern. That's why so many affirmations fail. They attempt to install new meanings without changing the vocal frequency that carries them. You can't heal a command by saying it louder. You have to change its rhythm. The spectrum of obligation language isn't inherently bad. In fact, some of it sustains social trust and collective responsibility. The problem arises when should becomes fused with self-worth. On one end of the spectrum, should expresses genuine value alignment. I should call my friend back because connection matters to me. On the other hand, it becomes emotional blackmail. I should call my friend back because I don't want them to think I'm selfish. The same word, two different nervous systems, one anchored in integrity, the other in fear. When you track should through your own speech, you'll notice this polarity immediately. Half of your shoulds will feel like truth. The rest will feel like tension. The task isn't to remove them, but to differentiate, to discern which part of you is speaking, the adult who chooses or the child who pleases. That's what the spell of should invites. Not rebellion for its own sake, but restoration of sovereignty through linguistic awareness. The disguises of should obligation language rarely shows up in its pure form. It hides behind softer masks. I just feel like I need to. It would be wrong not to. I probably ought to. Each variation wraps coercion in gentleness, creating a psychological paradox, pressure disguised as politeness. Even more subtly, should hides inside helpful phrases that appear kind. I just want what's best for you. You know what you should do. We say it to others as an act of care, unaware that what we're really offering is control, an invitation to conform to our version of comfort. That's how should becomes the social currency of manipulation. The moment someone hears should, their nervous system prepares to defend or submit. True connection freezes. Safety becomes strategy. Authenticity collapses under the weight of hidden obligation. That's why in Mirror Talk we study helpful language most carefully because most harm hides in kindness. Cultural coercion. The moral algorithm obligation language doesn't just live inside relationships. It fuels entire systems. Religions build hierarchies of purity around it. Governments write policies steeped in it. Social media algorithms amplify it. You should care more, buy more, post more, know more, fix more. It's endless moral debt disguised as relevance. In the modern attention economy, guilt is the most profitable emotion. A nervous system trapped in should is a perfect consumer, endlessly striving, never satisfied, and too fatigued to revolt. This is not a conspiracy, it's conditioning, and it reveals something profound about the link between language, power, and nervous system regulation. Whoever controls the grammar of obligation controls the flow of collective energy. That's why linguistic liberation isn't a luxury, it's a necessity for conscious citizenship. The emotional economics of should, every should carries a cost. It spends emotional energy on compliance instead of creativity. When we operate under obligation, we experience what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the split between inner truth and outer behavior. This dissonance manifests as fatigue, irritability, and shame. You're performing alignment while your body mourns authenticity. It's why burnout often feels moral. We don't just feel tired, we feel guilty for being tired. That's the hidden economy of should. It keeps us indebted to invisible expectations, chasing peace by paying with self-betrayal. And no amount of achievement can settle that debt because the creditor doesn't exist. It's an echo, not an entity. The mirror exercise, close your eyes and recall a recent should that shaped your behavior. Maybe it was, I should say yes. I should move on. I should be past this. Now ask, who taught me that? Notice what image, memory, or voice arises first, not as thought, but as felt sense. Perhaps you see a parent's face, hear a tone of disappointment, or feel the pressure of expectation around your chest. That's not imagination. That's interoception, your body's memory of linguistic threat. Let yourself breathe through it. Feel how each exhale makes the word lose a little of its authority. This is not about rebelling against those voices. It's about recognizing that you survived them. And now, survival no longer needs to sound like submission. The nervous system as translator. When we study obligation through the lens of nervous system language, NSL, something becomes beautifully clear. The body is always translating tone faster than the mind translates meaning. That's why a sentence like, "you should rest," can either feel soothing or shaming, depending entirely on how it's said. The nervous system doesn't care about grammar, it listens for breath. If the phrase is spoken with presence, it lands as support. If it's spoken with tension, it lands as judgment. And when the inner voice uses the same pattern, the effect is identical. A harsh inner should feels like an internalized scolding. A gentle should, grounded, compassionate, becomes guidance. That's the beginning of linguistic sovereignty, learning to let your tone tell the truth before your words do. The spiritual origin of should, if we go back far enough, it should began not as a threat, but as a form of prayer. Ancient moralists used it to describe the natural order, what should be, in harmony with divine will. It wasn't personal, it was cosmological. To act rightly was to align with the universe. But as religion became an institution, should shifted from alignment to obedience. The spiritual became social, the mystical became managerial, and language, once a bridge between soul and source, became a boundary between self and society. In this way, should mirrors the story of civilization itself, how guidance turned into governance. Reclaiming the word, we cannot exile should completely, it's too deeply woven into our linguistic DNA. But we can reclaim it, we can transform its vibration from contraction to expansion, from coercion to clarity. When you notice yourself saying should, try adding context. I should call them because I care. I should rest because my body needs it. I should apologize because I value accountability and peace. When you name the why, you return to choice. You turn the command back into a connection. That's the art of linguistic re-regulation, to take the syntax of subordination and rewire it for self-awareness. Reflection prompt. Before we move into the next element, take a moment to ask yourself, where in my language does care turn into control? Which sentences in my life sound like love but feel like pressure? Because every should is an invitation not to obey, but to observe. When you begin to hear its tone clearly, you'll find that the power it held was never in the word itself. It was always in your willingness to mistake fear for virtue. In the next element, the physiology of compulsion, when the body says yes while meaning no, we'll follow should into the nervous system, exploring how obligation gets encoded as bodily compliance. We'll look at why the voice, breath, and posture betray truth faster than thought can, and how the nervous system can learn to discern between authentic consent and conditioned agreement. Because freedom doesn't begin with defiance, it begins with noticing when your yes still sounds like a please don't leave me. Element 2, the physiology of compulsion. When the body says yes, while meaning no, every act of false consent begins in the body, not the mind. Before you ever agree to something you don't want to do, before you smile, nod, or soften your tone, 100 micro-movements prepare you. The eyes glaze just slightly, the breath thins, the shoulders rise a fraction, as if trying to make themselves invisible. That's the physiology of should in motion, the body's attempt to survive social pressure by disguising it as choice. You've probably felt it 1,000 times, the small yes that costs you, the one that sounds calm but burns somewhere behind the sternum, the one that carries a polite smile on the outside while the inner voice whispers, please, not again. This isn't a weakness, it's biology. The nervous system's double life, your body has two loyalties, safety and truth. When those two come into conflict, safety wins every time. The polyvagal system, the network of nerves connecting the brain to the body, was designed to keep you alive, not authentic. It constantly scans the environment for cues of threat or belonging. When it senses danger, even subtle relational danger, it reorganizes your physiology around protection. Sometimes that protection looks like fight or flight. But for many of us, especially those raised in emotionally inconsistent environments, it takes another form, appease. Appeasement is the nervous system's quiet masterpiece. It softens tone, steadies gaze, slows breath, and mimics calm even when the heart is racing. It is the body saying, if I act safely, maybe I'll be safe. When we use words like should, must, ought, we trigger this appeasement loop. The brain translates these words not as guidance, but as potential punishment. The body responds with micro-submission. Muscles constrict, jaw sets, posture tilts forward. It's as if your nervous system bows slightly, even when you're alone. This is why should feels heavy in the chest. It carries the posture of apology. The false consent reflex. Say you're asked to take on an extra task at work. Your instinct says no, but your mouth says yes before you've even thought about it. What happened in those 2 seconds wasn't indecision. It was your autonomic nervous system choosing appeasement faster than the prefrontal cortex could intervene. Your body calculated that rejection or disapproval posed more immediate danger than exhaustion, so it traded honesty for harmony. This is called neuroception, the body's preconscious detection of safety or threat. It doesn't wait for logic, it acts. That's why so many of our yeses are pre-verbal. When we live inside obligation language, this reflex becomes chronic. We don't even recognize it as fear anymore. It just feels like being a good person. But biologically, false consent is still a trauma response. It floods the system with cortisol and adrenaline, followed by shame. The body knows it has betrayed itself. The gut tightens, the throat aches, the jaw trembles slightly. You can hear this betrayal in tone, a quiet over-earnestness, a softness that borders on self-erasure. It's the sound of someone trying to sound agreeable while holding back a storm. The somatic signature of should each nervous system carries its own dialect of obedience. Some hold it in their spine, a permanent posture of politeness. Some hold it in the diaphragm, a shallow breath that keeps emotion from surfacing. Some in the throat, the swallowed protest, the unfinished word. If you listen to your own speech when saying should, you'll notice a pattern. The exhale is shorter than the inhale. That imbalance is not linguistic, it's physiological. The body is preparing for reprimand. Every should becomes a rehearsal for compliance, micro-submission to invisible authority. This is why self-talk matters more than self-concept. You can think you're free, but if your tone still carries appeasement, your nervous system hasn't got the memo. When the body argues back, sometimes the body refuses to obey. It rebels in its own language through fatigue, illness, or emotional shutdown. Psychosomatic research has long shown that chronic stress rooted in suppressed agency manifests physically. Conditions like tension headaches, digestive issues, jaw pain, and chronic fatigue often appear in people who live under sustained internal pressure to be good, helpful, or accommodating. The body does what the voice won't. It says no. Trauma therapist Peter Levine, founder of somatic experiencing, describes this as the body's protest. When the nervous system is trapped in appeasement for too long, energy that was meant for defense has nowhere to go. It turns inward, compressing vitality into symptoms. Your fatigue is not laziness. It's your body's refusal to continue negotiating with invisible expectations. The biology of people-pleasing Dr. Stephen Porges, who developed polyvagal theory, explains that social mammals depend on co-regulation, the shared nervous system state that signals safety. For children, safety comes from predictability, but when care is inconsistent, when love and withdrawal coexist, the child learns to manage the parent's mood through compliance. This strategy becomes the blueprint for adult interaction. If I can keep you calm, I'll survive. The brain wires itself around external regulation. The body becomes fluent in reading micro-expressions, tone shifts, pauses, anything that predicts danger or disapproval. By adulthood, this skill looks like empathy, but underneath it's vigilance. The pleaser's empathy is rarely born of compassion, it's born of anticipation. It's a nervous system that has mistaken other people's comfort for oxygen. That's the physiology of compulsion. The body saying yes, not because it agrees, but because it fears extinction. Cognitive dissonance as a physical sensation. When you agree to something that violates your own boundaries, the dissonance isn't abstract, it's bodily. Cognitive dissonance feels like holding your breath while smiling. It's the split between truth and safety, experienced as pressure in the chest or nausea in the gut. Neuroscientific studies show that when we act against our authentic preference, the anterior cingulate cortex, part of the brain involved in conflict monitoring, lights up like an alarm. It's the neural equivalent of a truth detector, signaling that something doesn't add up. But if that alarm rings too often without repair, if we repeatedly override it for social harmony, the system adapts. It numbs. Eventually, we no longer feel the discomfort consciously, we just call it stress. That's why breaking the spell of should often begins not with language, but with sensation, learning to detect the earliest physiological cues of self-betrayal. Body as barometer. Here's a short exercise. Next time you're about to say yes to something, pause for one breath and check 3 places. Throat, is there tightness or ease? Chest, is the breath deep or shallow? Stomach, is it open or clenched? If all 3 contract, your body is voting no, no matter what your mouth says. This awareness alone begins to rewire the appeasement loop. You're re-educating your nervous system to recognize congruence, the alignment between speech and state. In nervous system language, NSL, we call this micro-tracking, the art of catching the body's truth signals before words override them. Because every genuine yes begins as a physiological exhale. The shame cycle, when false consent becomes habitual, shame follows close behind. You blame yourself for overcommitting, for being tired, for resenting people you care about. You tell yourself you should be stronger, more patient, more grateful. But shame isn't the problem. It's the proof that a boundary was crossed. It's your body's way of saying, this isn't mine to carry. Unfortunately, many of us were raised to interpret shame as moral failure instead of information. So instead of using it as feedback, we double down on compliance, repeating the very pattern that caused it. This is how the nervous system becomes trapped in a feedback loop of obligation and guilt. 1. Feel pressure 2. Say yes 3. Resent it 4. Feel shame for resentment 5. Say yes again to repair the shame. Each loop tightens the body's tolerance for authenticity until even neutrality feels risky. To break it, you must first allow your no to exist without proof or apology. A language of the throat. The throat is the nervous system's crossroads where expression meets survival. In moments of false consent, it becomes the site of microcollapse. You can observe this physiologically. The larynx rises slightly, narrowing the airway. The voice softens, pitch increases. The exhale shortens to maintain social approval. That's what appeasement sounds like. In contrast, truth has a slower rhythm. It resonates lower, steadier, with a fuller breath. It's not louder, it's truer. Learning to inhabit that tone again requires safety, not willpower. You cannot force authenticity through tension. You can only invite it through regulation. That's why somatic therapies often begin with breath and vocal exercises, humming, sighing, toning, simple ways of reteaching the body that sound doesn't equal danger. Because until the throat feels safe, the truth will always come out as performance. The cost of chronic appeasement. There's a loneliness that comes from perpetual agreement. People may like you, rely on you, even praise your kindness, but they don't truly know you because you're never fully there. Your relationships become stage plays, rehearsed scripts of harmony that hide quiet resentment. You start to wonder why intimacy feels draining instead of nourishing. But intimacy built on appeasement isn't intimacy, it's management. And management requires constant vigilance. When the nervous system is permanently tuned to prevent disruption, there's no room for curiosity, spontaneity, or genuine connection. The body becomes an instrument of prediction rather than presence. That's the tragic gift of chronic fawning. It keeps everyone calm, including you, but it also keeps you from ever being fully alive. Reclaiming the reflex, breaking the physiology of compulsion, doesn't mean forcing yourself to say no more often. It means learning to recognize the moment before the automatic yes. At micro-pause, the half-second of awareness between stimulus and speech, is where sovereignty begins. In that breath, you can ask, is this choice born of care or of fear? Am I speaking from safety or seeking safety? When you build the capacity to sense the difference, you start choosing rather than complying. And slowly, the body learns a new pattern. That survival doesn't depend on self-erasure. Over time, your yes becomes lighter. Your no becomes less defensive. Your presence becomes less performative. Because authenticity is not loud, it's regulated. A mirror moment. Pause for a moment now. Think of a situation where your body said no, but your voice said yes. Replay it gently, not to shame yourself, but to observe. What sensations accompanied that choice? Did your shoulders tense? Did your breath pause? Did your tone flatten? These are not mistakes, they are messages. Each one is your nervous system whispering, I can't afford to lose connection. Now, breathe. Whisper to yourself, you're safe enough now to mean what you say. That's not affirmation, it's permission. It tells the old wiring that truth no longer equals abandonment. The somatic drill, tracing the no. Here's a short NSL practice you can try the next time obligation rises. 1. Pause before responding. Feel your feet, your spine, your jaw. 2. Notice the first micro movement. Does your body lean forward, fawn, or back? Withdraw. 3. Breathe once, slowly. Let the exhale be longer than the inhale. 4. Whisper your truth under your breath, even if you can't say it aloud yet. I don't want to. I need rest. That doesn't feel right. 5. Observe what changes. Sometimes the shoulders drop. Sometimes tears rise. Sometimes nothing happens. That's okay. The body is listening. This is how you begin to build a nervous system that recognizes congruence, where the body and voice tell the same story. Over time, this congruence becomes self-trust. And self-trust is the foundation of true freedom. The compassion behind compulsion. It's easy to resent the part of yourself that keeps saying yes. But that part isn't your enemy. It's your oldest protector. It learned, often before you could speak, that harmony meant survival. When you meet it with compassion instead of criticism, something remarkable happens. The nervous system softens. It begins to realize that it no longer needs to perform to stay loved. That's the beginning of integration, not a war between selves, but a reunion. Reflection prompt. What does my body do when I obey an expectation I don't believe in? Where does the yes live, in my mouth or in my muscles? Write or speak these questions aloud. Notice which one lands deeper. If you can feel an answer rather than think one, you're already speaking the nervous system's language. Next, we'll move from physiology to psychology, from the body's reflexes to the mind's contradictions. In element 3, the linguistics of freedom, from should to choose, we'll explore how language can retrain the nervous system, replacing obligation syntax with agency syntax. Because once the body remembers choice, the words begin to follow. And that's when speech becomes liberation, when every sentence carries the sound of safety. Element 3, the linguistics of freedom, from should to choose freedom doesn't begin in politics or philosophy. It begins in syntax. It begins in the way a sentence breathes through you, how a word lands in your body before it reaches your mind. It begins with the difference between should and to choose. The shift seems grammatical, almost trivial, but it's the difference between obedience and ownership, between coercion and consent, between performing goodness and embodying integrity. In the language of the nervous system, should contracts the body. Choose expands. One commands, the other connects. One speaks from fear of rejection, the other from presence. To understand linguistic freedom, we have to explore how language shapes not only thought, but physiology, how words themselves become nervous system cues. The grammar of captivity. Every culture has its grammar of captivity, a set of words and sentence structures designed to maintain compliance. In English, obligation is embedded deep in the linguistic architecture. Modal verbs like should, must, ought, and have to. They sound innocent, but neurologically they activate sympathetic dominance, a subtle fight-or-flight response linked to external authority. Your body doesn't interpret I should as self-direction. It hears it as surveillance. This is the linguistic residue of hierarchy. Language developed not just to communicate, but to control, to make cooperation predictable through shared rules of obedience. The very structure of proper speech rewards conformity and punishes deviation. Even politeness, our most socially acceptable tone, evolved as a nervous system strategy to prevent threat escalation. So when you say I should, you're not just expressing intention, you're participating in a centuries-old nervous contract between fear and order. Freedom begins the moment you realize that the grammar itself can be rewritten. The polyvagal code of choice. The nervous system doesn't understand words as abstractions. It reads them as physiological events. Each syllable sends ripples through breath, tone, and muscle. When you say should, the body subtly braces. The breath shortens. The exhale collapses. The larynx tightens to modulate politeness. When you say choose, something else happens. The diaphragm releases slightly. The shoulders relax. The tone drops half a register. The body holds ownership again. This is choice physiology, the ventral vagal state associated with safety, presence, and connection. In this state, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for creativity, empathy, and long-term vision, switches on. That's why true choice feels expansive. It activates your capacity for imagination. Obligation language, by contrast, shrinks your mental field. It limits the possibility to survival, framing every decision as a moral test. In other words, should narrows awareness to control, choice widens it to curiosity. Linguistic entrapment versus linguistic agency obligation-based language operates on the assumption that behavior must be policed to ensure virtue. Freedom-based language operates on the understanding that integrity arises from safety. Here's the distinction in motion. I should go for a run. Leads the body to brace for performance. I choose to move because I need to expend some energy. The body collaborates. The difference isn't about discipline. It's about direction of authority. In the first, power flows outward toward an imagined observer, a parent, a system. In the second, it flows inward towards self-governance. Psychologist Albert Bandura, known for his work on self-efficacy, observed that agency is inseparable from language. People who speak in autonomous syntax, I choose, I decide, I prefer, show higher resilience and lower stress reactivity than those who use obligation-based phrasing. I must, I have to, I can't. The linguistic shift literally changes your stress hormones. Choice releases oxytocin and serotonin, neurotransmitters linked to connection and calm. Obligation releases cortisol and adrenaline, the biochemistry of coercion. That's why freedom isn't only philosophical, it's hormonal. The syntax of sovereignty. To rebuild a free internal language, we must examine our syntax of subordination, the habitual way we structure self-talk. It often sounds like this. I should be further along. I have to fix this. I need to make them happy. Each sentence places you beneath an unseen judge. The subject, I, disappears behind the task or the expectation. It's not you speaking, it's the internalized authority that once decided who you were allowed to be. When you reframe the syntax, the nervous system recalibrates. I want to understand where I am. I choose to repair what matters. I can care about them without performing for them. The moment you shift from subordinate syntax to sovereign syntax, breath deepens, shoulders drop, tone slows. It's subtle, but the body registers it instantly. I'm not being watched anymore. That's linguistic liberation, not louder words, but quieter fear. The mirror of intention language at its deepest level is a mirror for intention. When we speak from compulsion, tone carries the vibration of survival. When we speak from choice, tone carries the vibration of coherence. You can hear it in everyday phrases. I should say something nice versus I want to speak kindly. The first is performance. The second is presence. The difference isn't moral, it's somatic honesty. Because when your tone and truth align, your words start healing instead of hiding. In mirror talk, we call this vocal congruence, the nervous system's ability to express truth at the same frequency it's felt. When you achieve it, people feel your authenticity before they understand your meaning. That's what real influence sounds like, not persuasion, but coherence. The unconscious should, even as you begin to speak differently, should hides in the background, sneaky, shape-shifting, disguised as kindness or logic. It appears in thoughts like, I should want this. I should be grateful for what I have. I should be over this by now. Each of these sentences carries an implicit accusation that your current self is failing to meet the standard of your imagined ideal self. This is the linguistic root of shame. It divides you into two versions, the one who is and the one who should be. Freedom begins when you stop trying to negotiate between them, when you let the should-be self-dissolve and meet the is-self without judgment. That's not resignation, that's regulation. The nervous system can only change what it feels safe to witness, and nothing disarms shame faster than awareness without punishment. Language and neural plasticity. Every time you replace a should with a choose, you're not just rewriting thought, you're rewiring the brain. Neuroscientist Donald Hebb famously said, neurons that fire together wire together. When you pair self-agency language with calm physiology, you're forming new neural pathways of safety. Imagine that for decades, your brain paired the phrase I should with tension, guilt, and urgency. Each repetition strengthened a circuit connecting language, stress hormones, and muscle tension. Now, when you consciously shift to I choose, you're creating a competing circuit, one that links autonomy with relaxation. At first, the old one fires faster, it's better practiced, but with repetition, the new one begins to dominate. This is what linguistic neuroplasticity looks like in real life. Each phrase becomes a repatterning exercise, teaching your nervous system that freedom can be safe. In this way, language becomes rehabilitation for self-trust. When freedom feels dangerous, here's the paradox. The first taste of linguistic freedom can feel terrifying. If your body learned that compliance equals safety, autonomy can register as a threat. You might replace should with choose and feel a sudden wave of anxiety, like you've broken an invisible rule. That's not regression, it's recalibration. It's the nervous system testing whether authenticity still leads to abandonment. Freedom initially feels unsafe because it removes the predictability of control. For people raised in rigid environments where obedience was love's currency, this can trigger grief, guilt, even panic. That's why it's essential to pace liberation gently. You can't leap from captivity to sovereignty. You have to regulate your way there. Start with micro-choices. I choose to pause. I choose not to answer right now. I choose to check what my body says before I speak. Each small decision reteaches your system that safety and choice can coexist. Replacing coercion with curiosity. A powerful way to deconstruct should is to replace it with a question instead of a command. Instead of I should call them, try, do I want to connect, or am I afraid of being seen as selfish? Instead of I should exercise, try, what kind of movement would feel kind to my body today? Instead of I should be happy, ask, what emotion is here that I'm not allowing? Questions decentralize authority. They invite exploration rather than enforcement. They shift the nervous system from defense to discovery, from threat to play. This is why curiosity is neurologically freeing. It activates the dopaminergic reward system, increasing openness and learning. Control activates fear, curiosity activates flow. And should is the linguistic opposite of curiosity. It tells you the answer before you've even asked the question. The ethics of choice true freedom doesn't reject responsibility, it reframes it. When choice replaces obligation, ethics becomes embodied rather than enforced. Instead of I should do the right thing, you begin to sense, I want to act in integrity because my body feels congruent when I do. That's embodied morality, not rule following, but resonance. In this state, guilt no longer dictates behavior. Empathy does. You stop living reactively to avoid punishment and start living responsively to honor coherence. And when communities operate from this state collectively, obligation evolves into interdependence, a form of mutual care that doesn't rely on coercion. In many indigenous cultures, for instance, responsibility is not a should, but a song, a calling woven into rhythm and relationship. You don't obey, you harmonize. That's what freedom sounds like in the community. The reclamation of desire, one of the quietest casualties of should-based living, is desire. When you spend years managing other people's comfort, your body forgets what it actually wants. Desire feels dangerous because it threatens to disrupt the order built by obligation. It carries too much aliveness, too much unpredictability. But desire is the nervous system's compass for authenticity. It's not indulgence, it's information. When you replace I should with I want, your body re-enters the realm of honesty. It starts to remember its natural rhythm, the one that was interrupted by appeasement. Of course, not every want can be fulfilled, but naming it truthfully ends the self-deception. And authenticity, even without satisfaction, restores vitality, because repression costs more energy than disappointment. The inner dialogue rewrite. Let's look at what linguistic repatterning sounds like in practice. Obligation. I should visit my parents more often. Hidden meaning, if I don't, I'm ungrateful. Freedom. I choose how I connect with my parents. Hidden meaning, I can love them without reenacting old guilt. Obligation. I should stay positive. Hidden meaning, my pain is unacceptable. Freedom. I allow my emotions to move through me. Hidden meaning, my honesty is healing. Obligation. I should forgive. Hidden meaning, my boundaries aren't valid. Freedom. I choose compassion without excusing harm. Hidden meaning, my empathy includes me. Each rewrite changes not only thought, but breath. Each one teaches the body that truth doesn't need to apologize. The linguistic ritual, from should to choose, here's a simple practice to embody this shift. 1. Catch the phrase. Notice every time you say should, must, or have to. 2. Pause, take one slow breath and feel what the body does. 3. Translate, replace the word with choose, prefer, or want. 4. Observe, notice if your tone or posture changes. 5. Reflect, ask does this sentence still feel true? Sometimes the translation won't fit, and that's valuable data. It means the obligation was never aligned with your truth. Over time, this becomes a habit of freedom, your default nervous system language shifting from coercion to choice. The humility of freedom is often romanticized as rebellion, but true freedom is gentler than that. It's not a shout, it's an exhale. It doesn't reject responsibility. It simply removes the fear beneath it. When you begin to live from choice, you stop needing to prove goodness. Your presence becomes your integrity. You move from performance to participation, from moral compliance to creative belonging. This is the quiet revolution of linguistic sovereignty. The understanding that the most radical act isn't to fight the system, but to stop letting its grammar live in your throat. Reflection prompt. Which of my daily sentences tighten my body when I say them? Which phrases feel like performance rather than permission? What does freedom sound like in my voice? You'll know the answers not by their logic, but by their resonance. Freedom doesn't need to be convincing. It just needs to be true enough to breathe with. Freedom of language always reveals its next paradox. Once we stop saying should, another voice emerges softer, sweeter, and far more deceptive. It whispers, "But you're a good person, aren't you?" The nervous system pauses, unsure whether that's reassurance or a warning. Because even after we reclaim choice, many of us still translate authenticity through morality, still seek safety by performing goodness. We've learned to hide control inside compassion, to dress fear as virtue, to call obedience kindness. The question isn't just how do we speak freely, but who taught us to believe that freedom was dangerous? In the next element, we turn toward the most subtle form of control, the morality trap, where virtue becomes a survival strategy, and being good replaces being real. Element 4, the morality trap and the myth of goodness. The moment you begin to speak freely, something else rises up, not the voice of authority, but the echo of conscience. It sounds noble, the impulse to do right, to be good, to not hurt anyone. But underneath, if you listen closely, there's tension. There's the faint tremor of fear. Because for many of us, being good wasn't a moral choice. It was a survival plan. We didn't learn goodness through ethics. We learned it through nervous system conditioning. We learned that approval meant safety, and that disapproval meant distance. So we internalized obedience as love, self-suppression as empathy, and exhaustion as virtue. The morality trap begins here, when goodness becomes the price of belonging, not the expression of it. The nervous system logic of goodness, long before religion or philosophy gave us rules, the body wrote its own code. An infant learns morality through tone, not theology. Through the rise and fall of a parent's voice, through the subtle tightening of the air when it cries too loudly, through the smile that follows compliance. What feels right is whatever soothes the environment. What feels wrong is whatever disrupts it. This is the nervous system's first moral law, safety equals approval. And it's how goodness becomes the earliest fawn response. When you grow up in relational unpredictability, where warmth and withdrawal alternate without warning, you learn to anticipate emotional weather like a storm reader. You smile before anyone asks you to. You apologize before you've done anything wrong. You shrink your truth into something manageable. That's not morality, it's regulation. It's a survival strategy dressed as virtue. The good child, where virtue and vigilance merge. Every good child begins as a nervous system genius. They master microcalibration, the ability to read a room faster than adults can think. They feel tone shifts before words form. They soothe, accommodate, overachieve, or disappear, whatever keeps the connection intact. And the world rewards them. Teachers call them responsible. Parents call them mature. Religious figures call them pure. Society calls them polite. But none of those labels describe what's really happening. A body that equates love with labor. Good children don't grow up. They just graduate into good adults. The same vigilance becomes productivity. The same self-erasure becomes empathy. The same fear of conflict becomes diplomacy. And while the world applauds their stability, the inner voice whispers, "If I stop being good, everything will fall apart." That's the morality trap in its purest form, a nervous system that's learned to survive through moral performance. Moral perfectionism as a control response. When the nervous system fears unpredictability, control feels like safety. For some, that control expresses as routine or precision. For others, it expresses as moral perfectionism, an obsessive need to get it right, to avoid blame or disappointment at all costs. In relational trauma, rightness becomes the nervous system's version of shelter. You might hear it as thoughts like, "If I say everything perfectly, they won't get angry. If I do everything properly, they'll stay. If I'm kind enough, no one can accuse me of being bad." But control doesn't equal safety, it equals surveillance. And self-surveillance, over time, becomes self-violence. Neuroscience helps us understand why. Moral perfectionism lights up the anterior cingulate cortex, ACC, the brain's error monitor. The same region is activated during guilt and anxiety. When you believe your worth depends on goodness, the ACC is constantly scanning for moral failure. Even a neutral comment or forgotten message can trigger a cascade. Cortisol spikes, the heart rate rises, and the body moves into fawn, an appeasing freeze. The brain mistakes imperfection for danger, and every act of self-acceptance feels like rebellion. The productivity of virtue. Our culture doesn't challenge this, it monetizes it. In the modern age, goodness has been rebranded as productivity. We measure morality in efficiency. Did you achieve enough? Respond quickly enough? Care enough? Post the right thing at the right time with the right tone. The social nervous system, our collective field of attunement, now runs on algorithmic virtue. It rewards outrage, self-flagellation, and performance of care. We've replaced confessional booths with comment sections. You can almost feel the nervous system tightening when scrolling. Am I good enough for this era's definition of empathy? In this digital morality theatre, guilt becomes currency. The more visibly you apologize, the more socially safe you become. But here's the paradox. Goodness performed without regulation is just another form of fawning, the body's attempt to earn safety through spectacle. The neuroscience of guilt reinforcement guilt feels moral, but biologically it's mechanical. When you feel guilt, your amygdala, fear center, activates, followed by the ventral striatum releasing dopamine once you correct the wrong. This creates a feedback loop. 1. Guilt creates stress, cortisol, and adrenaline release. 2. Compliance reduces stress, dopamine and serotonin release. 3. The nervous system learns that obedience equals relief. That's why guilt is addictive. It offers temporary regulation through submission. This is also why abusive systems, from families to corporations to governments, use moral language as control. If they can make you feel bad for asserting yourself, they can control you without visible force. The nervous system's longing for relief does the rest. So the question isn't, am I good? It's who benefits when I feel bad. The myth of the good person is seductive because it seems selfless. It promises belonging, purpose, redemption. But it comes at a cost. It disconnects you from complexity. Real goodness isn't tidy. It includes imperfection, contradiction, and self-honesty. When morality is divorced from embodiment, it becomes theatre, language that soothes others while betraying yourself. You might say, I'm fine when you're collapsing, or I forgive you when you're still bleeding, or it's not a big deal when your whole body is screaming that it is. That's not virtue. That's dissociation in polite disguise. In Mirror Talk, we call this synthetic compassion, empathy performed at the expense of integrity. It feels kind in tone but hollow in presence because the body isn't aligned with the words. True compassion includes the self. It doesn't demand purity, it demands congruence. The cultural machinery of goodness. Every civilization has defined goodness according to what keeps its hierarchy stable. In religion, obedience. In industry, productivity. In politics, conformity. In social media, visibility. Each claims moral authority but functions as control. As philosopher Michel Foucault wrote, power produces subjects through the discourse of virtue. That means morality, in its social form, isn't about truth, it's about training. It's a set of linguistic and emotional cues that signal compliance to the dominant system. When you internalize those cues, your nervous system begins to police itself. You no longer need an external authority. Now you become your own warden, and this is where the morality trap becomes invisible. It's not enforced by punishment, it's maintained by self-congratulation. You feel good when you perform the system's version of good. You feel bad when you don't, and the body becomes a stage for socially approved suffering. The emotional debt economy. At the heart of the morality trap lies a single belief. I owe the world my goodness. This belief creates an emotional debt economy, one in which self-worth is measured in repayment. You owe your parents gratitude for survival, even if survival was painful. You owe your job loyalty for stability, even if it erodes your joy. You owe society usefulness for existing, even when rest is what you truly need. This debt has no endpoint because it's written in language, not logic. The word should keeps the account open forever, but there's no such thing as moral debt in a healthy system. There is only reciprocity, the natural flow between giving and receiving. Debt binds. Reciprocity balances. When you begin to regulate your nervous system, guilt loses its grip. You no longer seek safety through repayment. You find it through resonance. That's when morality transforms back into integrity, the good adult and the disappearing self. As the good child grows older, they often become the reliable friend, the therapist friend, the one everyone confides in but rarely checks on. They are fluent in empathy but illiterate in need. They can soothe others' nervous systems but can't locate their own. They confuse calmness with health, people-pleasing with peace. And deep down, they hold an invisible rule. If I'm good enough, I won't be left. But moral perfectionism always ends in collapse, because goodness that's disconnected from authenticity consumes itself. The nervous system cannot sustain constant suppression. Eventually, the body rebels through burnout, resentment, or illness. That's not failure, that's the body's integrity returning. The return to wholeness often feels like disobedience at first, saying no, setting limits, and disappointing others. But each act of honest refusal rewires the system toward truth. Freedom doesn't always sound kind. Sometimes it sounds like finally, beyond moral polarity. The myth of goodness survives through polarity, good versus bad, right versus wrong, us versus them. But consciousness evolves through integration, not opposition. The nervous system mirrors this truth. Healing happens not through suppressing bad states, but through inclusion. Ventral vagal safety doesn't mean perpetual calm. It means the capacity to move fluidly between states without losing coherence. In moral terms, this means the ability to hold contradiction without collapse, to be both compassionate and boundaried, loving and angry, peaceful and powerful. That's maturity, the integration of paradox. When you stop dividing yourself into moral binaries, you stop dividing your nervous system into war zones. You stop choosing between goodness and truth. And for the first time, you experience both. The somatic signature of integrity. You can feel the difference between moral anxiety and embodied integrity instantly. Moral anxiety feels tight, high-pitched, performative. The throat contracts, breath shortens, tone flattens. Embodied integrity feels grounded, slow, resonant. The diaphragm expands, breath deepens, tone stabilizes. Integrity is not a thought, it's a frequency. It's what your body feels like when your words and values align. That's why genuine goodness requires embodiment. Otherwise, you'll keep performing virtue with a dysregulated voice, a song of safety sung in a minor key. Who benefits when you obey? This is the question that breaks the spell. Who benefits when you feel guilty for resting? Who benefits when you believe self-sacrifice is the highest virtue? Who benefits when your empathy is weaponized against your own boundaries? When guilt feels automatic, pause. Place a hand over your chest. Ask your body, not your mind, whose rule am I following right now? If the answer comes with fear instead of peace, it's not morality, it's conditioning. True goodness never demands obedience. It invites awareness. Reflection prompt. Who benefits when I believe I owe the world my obedience? What parts of me are still trying to earn safety through goodness? What would morality feel like if it came from my body, not my fear? Sit with these questions as sensations, not concepts. Let your breath answer before your brain does. Goodness that costs you your truth isn't virtue, it's captivity. And you are not here to be a moral mascot for other people's comfort. You are here to be whole. Every morality system eventually collapses under its own weight. After years of shoulds, musts, and have-tos, the body begins to whisper its quiet rebellion, not as defiance, but as fatigue. That whisper is the nervous system remembering something older than obedience. Choice. Choice is the nervous system's native language, the pulse of autonomy before conditioning took hold. It's the moment breath returns, the shoulders drop, and you realize that permission was never meant to be borrowed. In this final element, we move from analysis to embodiment, from moral performance to living presence. We explore what it means to speak from consent instead of duty, to rebuild language as an act of self-trust, and to let words become instruments of freedom rather than evidence of fear. Because healing doesn't mean becoming perfect. It means finally sounding like yourself. Element 5. Integration practice and closing whisper. The language of consent. There is a sound the body makes when it stops performing and starts belonging again. It's quieter than breath and slower than thought. It happens the moment you realize you no longer owe the world your obedience, only your awareness. This is the language of consent, and it begins with a pause. The pause. From reflex to response, consent doesn't begin in words, it begins in space. That short pause between the impulse to speak and the act of speaking is where consciousness lives. It's where nervous system awareness catches the inherited reflex and says, wait, whose tone is this? Whose rule am I about to repeat? Most of us were never taught to pause. We were taught to respond quickly, to fill silence, to soothe, to smooth. In families governed by unspoken rules, silence often meant danger. So we learned to react instead of relate. But in mirror talk, the pause isn't passive, it's sovereign. It's not hesitation, it's calibration. It's how the body checks for alignment before language is released into the world. Try it before you say yes, inhale. Feel where the breath lands. Does your chest tighten or does your belly open? The body always answers before the mind constructs a justification. In NSL, nervous system language, the pause is the first act of consent, the nervous system's way of confirming safety before self-expression. When the pause is missing, we speak from survival. When the pause is present, we speak from power. Hence, locating truth in the body once we pause, we consent. Sensing is not analyzing. It's listening to the body's raw data before the brain edits it for social approval. In conditioned speech, sensation is muted. We override the gut to stay polite, override the heart to stay productive, override the throat to stay loved. But the body is a linguistic instrument. Each sensation is a syllable of truth. In NSL practice, sense means mapping sensation to meaning. A tightening jaw might signal withheld truth. A shallow breath might signal emotional overextension. A constricted throat might mean the words are still forming, not ready to leave. The goal isn't to fix these sensations, but to witness them without urgency. Because the moment we stop demanding immediate comfort, truth starts to surface. That's what makes this step sacred. Sensing is the nervous system's original way of knowing. Before we had words, we had resonance. Before logic, vibration. Language was born from bodies learning how to find coherence in sound. Choose. From obligation to ownership, choice is where healing becomes visible. It's the hinge between awareness and agency, where you stop reacting from fear and start responding from clarity. But choosing isn't easy when your entire life has been built around appeasement. For many, saying no feels like cruelty, and saying yes feels like duty. So consent becomes distorted into compliance. To reclaim consent, you must rewire what choice feels like in your body. Here's how. Step 1. Notice what choice feels like right now. Does your breath expand or contract? Does the body lean forward or backwards? Step 2. Ask your body for permission to slow down. Step 3. Speak only when you can feel your words resonate in your ribcage, not rattle in your throat. That resonance is your internal yes. It's not mental, it's vibrational. When choice comes from regulation rather than fear, it carries coherence. People may not agree with you, but they will feel the authenticity underneath your tone. And that's what NSL calls truth frequency, communication that self-regulates the moment it's spoken. Speak. The sound of freedom now comes the most visible part of the ritual, speaking. But in this framework, speech is not performance, it's integration. To speak from consent means to let words emerge from awareness, not from reflex. It's to let your nervous system, not your conditioning, set the rhythm. You can feel the difference immediately. Conditioned speech rushes, pleases, over-explains. Conscious speech slows, lands, and allows silence to carry meaning. In MLH, Mirror-Linguistic Hypothesis, every sentence has an emotional gravity. If the tone is light but the body is tense, the message collapses. But when body and word align, coherence emerges, and coherence feels like calm. That's why the most revolutionary act isn't shouting truth into the void. It's whispering it calmly when your nervous system used to tremble. The practice ritual, pause to sense to choose and to speak. Let's bring this into a daily embodied ritual. This is not a performance exercise. It's a nervous system recalibration sequence. 1. Notice the impulse to speak. Breathe. Let the silence stretch until you can feel your feet again. 2. Sense. Scan your body. Where is tension collecting? Where is energy open? 3. Choose. Ask, is this language coming from truth or fear? 4. Speak. Release the words at the speed of your breath, not your anxiety. Repeat this process not as a rule, but as a rhythm, until your speech naturally synchronizes with self-trust. When mastered, this sequence rewires the fight-flight-fawn pattern into relational coherence. It transforms communication from an act of survival into an act of creation. Rewrites for daily life language doesn't change through concepts, it changes through repetition. So here are a few Mirror Talk style rewrites that turn obligation into authenticity, words that have shown up in countless sessions, letters and conversations, all pointing to the same truth. Safety begins with self-consent. Old phrase, I should visit them. Rewrite, I'll visit when I have the energy to be present. This shifts duty into integrity. Love expressed through capacity, not compulsion. Old phrase, I can't upset them. Rewrite, I can be kind without betraying myself. This dissolves fawning while preserving compassion. The nervous system stays open instead of collapsing. Old phrase, I don't want to disappoint them. Rewrite, I honor them best when I tell the truth. The relational field shifts from performance to transparency. Old phrase, I must not let them down. Rewrite, I can show care without carrying what's not mine. Removes emotional over-responsibility. Restores boundaries as acts of respect. Old phrase, I should be grateful. Rewrite, I can feel gratitude and still want more. Reclaims expansion from shame. Old phrase, I owe them. Rewrite, I choose them. Converts guilt into generosity, the purest form of relational freedom. These rewrites aren't mantras, they're nervous system cues. Each new phrase is a reprogramming of breath and tone, an update to the body's linguistic software. When repeated consciously, they begin to shape the voice's default settings, slower, warmer, truer. That's when language becomes an ally, not a warden. Consent as nervous system sovereignty. True consent doesn't just mean the right to say no, it means the right to feel safe while saying it. Safety is not the absence of consequence, it's the presence of coherence. You might disappoint someone, you might lose approval, but if your voice stays regulated, your integrity remains intact. The nervous system's ultimate goal isn't peace, it's congruence. When your inner world and outer words match, the need for justification dissolves. That's why every no spoken from regulation feels like love, because it stops perpetuating a system of false connection. Consent, in this sense, becomes the most radical form of kindness. It says, I will not lie to you with my tone. It honors both people's humanity without collapsing into guilt or hierarchy. In a culture built on moral transaction, consent returns communication to its original sacredness, a co-regulation ritual, embodied reflection. What freedom sounds like close your eyes. Let your attention move toward your throat, not as a muscle, but as a messenger. Ask yourself quietly, what does freedom sound like in my voice? Don't rush for an answer. Instead, feel for resonance, warmth, vibration, ease. Notice how the body responds to even imagining that sound. For some, it might feel like laughter. For others, tears. For many, it feels like silence finally unclenched. That sound, whatever form it takes, is the voice that was waiting beneath should. It's the one that speaks without apology, not because it's defiant, but because it's aligned. Freedom doesn't shout, it hums. And when you learn to hear that hum beneath your sentences, you've begun the lifelong practice of consent, the art of speaking, as though your nervous system already trusts the world to hear you. Integrating choice into language. The goal of this episode isn't to eliminate should entirely. Language will always carry traces of conditioning. It's part of our collective grammar. The work is to bring awareness to its use, so that should becomes conscious rather than compulsive. Here's a practice to keep awareness alive in daily life. 1. Listen for the word should in your speech or thought. 2. Pause immediately and ask, is this obligation or preference? 3. Translate the sentence to reflect agency. I want to, I choose to, or I don't need to right now. 4. Speak it aloud and observe the change in your tone. The nervous system will register the shift before the intellect does. You'll feel your breath deepen, muscles soften, and your voice will drop half a tone, a physiological sign that you've returned to self-consent. This is linguistic liberation in microform. Over time, these small acts accumulate into sovereignty. You stop negotiating your belonging through compliance. You begin to live as though your tone itself were the proof that you're free, the echo beyond obligation. When we strip away all the moral performance, the productivity scripts, the quiet compulsions to please, what remains is startlingly simple, presence. The voice that once trembled with duty begins to tremble with wonder. The words that once bent themselves around others' comfort begin to stand upright in their own gravity. You start to notice that love spoken from choice feels different in your mouth, warmer, slower, heavier with truth. And the world, surprisingly, doesn't collapse. The people who once expected your obedience adjust to your honesty. Some leave, others soften, but you stay. You stay in your breath, your boundaries, your tone. You stay in your own moral center, one defined not by obedience but by awareness. That is what it means to unspell yourself, to end the linguistic inheritance of should. Consent, in the language of the nervous system, isn't about permission granted by others. It's about permission reclaimed from within. When your words stop apologizing for your existence, language becomes what it was always meant to be, not a cage, but communion. Every spell-of should eventually leaves behind an echo, a quieter frequency, soft but piercing, shame. It lingers in the pauses between our words, in the tremor that follows honesty, in the moments we wonder if freedom makes us selfish. Shame is the nervous system's recoil after liberation. It says, "You're too much, you've changed. You shouldn't have said that." But shame isn't an enemy. It's a leftover guardian, a remnant of the old contract between safety and silence. Where should controlled your choices, shame controls your tone. It whispers that tenderness must be earned, even from yourself. In the next episode, the voice of shame, transforming tone into tenderness. We'll walk straight into that frequency, to listen, not to flinch. We'll explore how the inner critic uses tone as a leash, why apology becomes a reflex, and how self-compassion rewires the voice from punishment to presence. Because every should that dies leaves a silence that wants to be sung again, and that song is tenderness. So as I wrap this episode, may the echoes of duty fade into the rhythm of choice, and when the hush of shame comes knocking, answer it with the gentleness you once saved for everyone else. Until next time, thank you for joining me today. You've been listening to Mirror Talk, the language of the nervous system. I'm James Miller.